Today's episode of Off the Timeline is titled, What If Baylor Took Ohio State's Spot in the First College Football Playoff? December 2014. College football is about to enter a brand new era. For the first time ever, the national champion would be decided by a four-team playoff. But the final selection created one of the biggest debates in modern college football history. The committee selected the Ohio State Buckeyes as the fourth team in the playoff after their famous 59-0 win over Wisconsin. And that decision launched one of the most legendary postseason runs the sport has ever seen. But many fans forget is that another team had an almost equally strong case, Baylor. They had a very strong season. They were co-conference champions of the Big 12, and they had one of the most exciting offenses in the country. So today we're exploring an alternate history scenario that is surprisingly realistic. What if Baylor took Ohio State's spot in the first college football playoff? Because if that happens, the Buckeyes never make their miracle run, the national championship matchup changes completely, and the entire history of the playoff era might look very different. But first, let's set the stage for the 2014 season. It was the first year of the playoff system, and no one really knew how the selection committee would evaluate teams. At the top of the rankings were three programs that seemed almost guaranteed to make it: Florida State, Alabama, and Oregon. The real controversy was always about the fourth spot. Several teams were competing for it, but by the end of the season, the debate had narrowed to two programs, Ohio State and Baylor. Baylor's resume. Baylor finished the season 11-1. Their offense was one of the most dangerous units in college football. They had big wins, they had strong performances, and they had arguably the most memorable comeback of the entire season when they erased a 21-point deficit to defeat TCU. The game would become the centerpiece of Baylor's playoff argument because it gave them something extremely valuable: a head-to-head win over one of their biggest competitors. Late in the season, Baylor faced West Virginia. The game is often remembered incorrectly. Some people think it may have not been the most dominant performance, but in reality, they won 41-27. A solid, convincing victory. It wasn't a miracle comeback. It wasn't a last-second escape. It was a strong win against a conference opponent. At the time, Baylor looked like a legitimate playoff contender, but the committee's attention was moving elsewhere, that being Ohio State. While Baylor was finishing their season, Ohio State had one final opportunity to impress the committee: the Big Ten championship game. Their opponent was Wisconsin, and what happened next completely changed the playoff conversation. Ohio State didn't just win, they dominated. 59-0. One of the most shocking conference championship results ever. The Buckeyes sent a message to the committee, and that message worked. Ohio State jumped into the fourth playoff spot. Baylor was left out. But here's where our alternate history begins. And let's set the table for the small change. In reality, the committee valued Ohio State's conference championship blowout. But what if the committee had weighed Baylor's resume differently? Remember, Baylor finished 11-1, and they had beaten TCU head-to-head. In this alternate history, the committee places slightly more emphasis on that head-to-head result. Instead of rewarding Ohio State's late statement win, they reward Baylor's overall season. The final playoff rankings change, and Baylor becomes the fourth team in the playoff. Ohio State drops to number 5. And that sets the table for the new playoff bracket. That single decision reshapes the entire playoff field. The semifinal matchups now have Alabama going up against Baylor, and suddenly the entire postseason landscape changes. The biggest question becomes, how does Baylor match up with Alabama? And that sets the table for Alabama versus Baylor. This alternate history hypothetical matchup between Alabama and Baylor would have been one of the most fascinating contrasts in the sport. Alabama represented power football, elite defense, physical dominance, control of the line of scrimmage. Baylor represented speed and chaos, tempo offense, wide formations, vertical passing attacks. Early in the game, Baylor's tempo creates problems. Their offense moves quickly. The defense struggles to substitute, and Baylor manages to score early. But Alabama eventually adjusts. Nick Saban's defense slows the pace. The defensive line starts controlling the game, and the Tide begin to pull away. By the fourth quarter, Alabama's depth becomes too much. Final score Alabama 41, Baylor 31. Baylor doesn't win, but they show they belong on the biggest stage, and that sets the table for the biggest ripple effect. The most important ripple effect of this alternate history happens before the national championship game. Because Ohio State never enters the playoff, the Buckeyes' legendary postseason run never happens. Quarterback Cardale Jones never becomes a playoff hero, and Ohio State never wins the 2014 national championship. Instead, the championship game becomes a matchup fans had wanted for years. Alabama versus Oregon, power versus speed, SEC defense against Oregon tempo, a completely different ending to the first playoff season. Now let's set the table for the long-term impact. This alternate history also changes the perception of the Big 12. For years, critics argued the conference played high-scoring offense but weak defense. But Baylor competing with Alabama on the playoff stage changes that narrative. The conference gains credibility, recruiting momentum changes, and Baylor's program earns even greater national respect, all because of one different committee decision. The first college football playoff shaped the entire modern era of the sport, but history often turns on small decisions. One committee change, one ranking vote, one different interpretation of a team's resume. In this alternate history, Baylor takes Ohio State's place, and the Buckeyes championship run never happens, and the first playoff season tells a completely different story. Now, if you enjoy this alternate history scenario, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more college football what-if stories, and let me know in the comments. Should Baylor have made the playoff in 2014, or did the committee get the decision right? And if you want to explore more alternate college football timelines, check out the videos on the screen right now.